Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Imagine you were a sailor, drifting across the North Atlantic on a moonless night. What lies before you is not a storm, not pirates, and not an enemy fleet closing in. There is only the Black Sea, unnaturally still, as if the entire ocean is holding its breath. Then the ship begins to slow. Even though the wind is still filling the sails, the water around the hull starts to foam. Dark whirlpools spread through the night, and from beneath the surface, something enormous begins to move. Tentacles as thick as tree trunks rise from the water, wrapping around the mast, crushing oak beams as easily as snapping dry branches. In that moment, the sailors understand that the thing dragging them downward is not merely a monster. It is humanity's oldest fear made flesh. The fear of a colossal power hidden beneath the surface of the world. A place we cannot see, cannot fully understand, and cannot beg for mercy. That is the Kraken. The sea monster that generations of sailors believed was more terrifying than death itself. But what makes the Kraken so extraordinary is not only its gigantic size or the tentacles capable of crushing ships. The Kraken is frightening because it was born on the blurred border between truth and nightmare. It may have originated from real giant squids, dangerous ocean currents, unexplained shipwrecks, or the imagination of people pushed to the edge by the cruelty of the sea. But whatever its origin, the Kraken has grown far beyond the shape of a simple creature. It has become a symbol of the deep ocean, of the unknown, of nature when it is no longer gentle, and of the feeling that beneath the beauty of the waves, there is always an ancient, cold world that has no need for humanity to exist. The story of the Kraken begins in the northern seas, where Norway, Greenland, and Iceland are surrounded by icy oceans, thick fog, and storms capable of swallowing an entire fleet. To people of the ancient world, the sea was not merely a trade route or a source of food. The sea was a living world, a wild kingdom with a will of its own. It could grant fish, gold, new lands, fame, and legendary journeys. But it could also take everything away in a single night, leaving behind no wreckage, no bodies, and no answers. When science had not yet given language to giant squids, deep-sea pressure, whirlpools, or strange waters, human beings created the Kraken as an explanation for disappearances too terrifying to understand. But that imagination was not naive. The Kraken is not like a dragon on a mountain, nor like a monster hidden in a forest. Dragons often guard treasure, possess lairs, have greed, and can be challenged. Monsters in the forest, however terrifying, still belong to a territory that humans can see, enter with torches, track, and hunt. The Kraken is different. It has no clear cave, no throne, no treasure, and no need for a reason to appear. It rises from a place no one can see the bottom of, destroys everything, and then disappears back into darkness. That facelessness is what makes the Kraken far more terrifying. A monster with a goal can still be understood, but a power with no face, no morality, and no negotiation feels almost like a dark god. In many Norse legends, the Kraken is described as so enormous that sailors could mistake it for an island. It is said that sometimes it would lie motionless on the surface of the sea, covered in seaweed, causing ships to believe it was land and approach it. For those who had drifted too long across the ocean, the sight of land was the promise of life, shelter, and an end to despair. But when they came closer, that island began to sink. The sea opened like a gigantic mouth. The water twisted into a vortex, and the ship was pulled into the abyss. Here, The Kraken does not kill only through strength. It kills through the deception of perception. It turns what humans desire most in the middle of the sea into a deadly trap. That is the first symbolic layer of the Kraken. The fear that sometimes hope itself can lead us to destruction. A sailor lost at sea who sees land will find it difficult to doubt. A person dying of thirst will not question the water before them. A desperate human being is often willing to believe anything that promises salvation. And the Kraken, in the form of the false island, becomes a symbol of the most dangerous illusions. False safety, false power, false victory, false paradise. It does not need to chase humanity. It only needs to remain still, allowing greed, fear, and blind hope to draw people closer. That is why the Kraken is not only a monster of the sea, but also a monster of human perception. Over time, the image of the Kraken continued to transform. From a living island in ancient tales, it gradually became a gigantic, tentacled beast, resembling an octopus or a colossal squid. Those tentacles made the Kraken more vivid, more cinematic, and even more terrifying. Because tentacles are not like claws or teeth. Claws cut, teeth bite, but tentacles wrap, tighten, and drag downward. They create the feeling of total control. Once touched by the Kraken, humans are not merely attacked, they are stripped of freedom. They are no longer sailors fighting on the deck of a ship. They become small creatures being pulled out of the world of light and into a realm without voices. That is why the Kraken is so deeply connected to the fear of the deep sea. On land, humans can run, hide, build walls, light fires, hold weapons, and fight back. But at sea, especially at night, humans stand only on a fragile piece of wood in a world without solid ground. Beneath them are thousands of meters of dark water, where sunlight cannot reach, where every sound is swallowed, and where the human body is completely powerless. The Kraken does not need to appear constantly to inspire fear. The mere possibility that it exists below is enough to turn every wave into a warning sign. It is what makes the ocean no longer just a landscape, but an abyss staring back at humankind. What makes the Kraken different from many other monsters in mythology is that it does not represent evil in the usual sense. It is not a demon tempting souls, not a witch casting curses, not a tyrant seeking to rule humanity. The Kraken is terrifying because it is almost indifferent. It is nature in its absolute form. A storm can kill hundreds of people without hating anyone. A tsunami can erase a city without having intention. The Kraken is the same. It crushes ships not because it hates humans, but because humans have entered its waters. Or, more simply, because it moves within its own world. That indifference is what makes the Kraken even more tragic. Humans always want to believe there must be a reason behind suffering. If there is an enemy, we can fight. If there is sin, we can seek redemption. If there is a curse, we can try to break it. But what if the thing destroying us is simply a normal part of the universe? What if our lives are so small that the ocean does not even notice us? The Kraken forces humanity to face a cold truth. Not all pain has meaning, and not every monster needs to hate us in order to destroy us. Sometimes the most terrifying thing is not being punished, but being erased by a force that does not even know our name. In sailors' stories, the Kraken often appears at the moment when human ambition reaches its limit. When a ship sails too far beyond the map, when a captain wants to cross forbidden waters, when whalers risk entering thick fields of drifting ice, when merchants load their vessels with silver and gold and believe the sea is merely a road to profit. The Kraken rises like a punishment, but not in a simple moral sense. It is the final boundary that the world places before human arrogance. It does not say that humans must never explore. It reminds us that exploration is never the same as ownership. The ocean may allow us to pass, but it never belongs to us. At this level, the Kraken becomes a symbol of the question: how far do humans have the right to go? From ancient times to the modern age, we have always been obsessed with conquest. Conquering the sea, the sky, space, technology, data, genes, artificial intelligence, and even the deepest secrets of nature. Every era has its own ocean, and every ocean has its own Kraken. Something lying beneath our most glorious ambitions, waiting to rise and remind us that understanding is not the same as control. Some doors open not so that humans may enter as rulers, but so that we may understand that we are still strangers in a universe far too vast. Perhaps that is why the Kraken remains so powerful in modern culture. It appears in films, games, novels, comics, and almost every time, it carries a sense of apocalypse. When a dragon flies across the sky, we see grandeur. When an army of the undead marches forward, we see war. But when the Kraken rises from the sea, we see the collapse of order. Warships, floating fortresses, symbols of human power, suddenly become toys before a creature that needs no technology. The Kraken makes everything modern look embarrassingly fragile. It reminds us that with a single movement from the abyss, all human pride floating on the surface can be broken. In pirate stories and modern fantasy, the Kraken is sometimes used as a weapon by a greater power. In that form, it is no longer only a natural monster, but an instrument of authority. This is a fascinating transformation. Because if the original Kraken represents indifferent nature, then the controlled Kraken represents something even more frightening. Ancient power falling into the hands of those with ambition. A creature already terrifying on its own becomes a tool of pursuit, punishment, and fear. At that point, the monster no longer lies only beneath the sea. It exists within the structures of human power, in the hands of those who know how to turn fear into chains. And that is when the Kraken reflects a very real dark side of history. Humans do not only fear monsters. Humans also want to possess monsters. We want to tame storms, place chains on ancient powers, and turn fear into a weapon that serves thrones, money, or control. From ancient empires to the modern world, whoever controls fear controls the crowd. That is why the Kraken in popular culture often asks not only what lies beneath the sea, it also asks, who is holding the monster's chain? And sometimes, the answer is more terrifying than the creature itself. But there is also a sadness to the Kraken, because in most stories, we see it only from the human point of view. To sailors, it is a monster. To captains, it is disaster. To legend, it is a nightmare. But from the perspective of the ocean, the Kraken may not be an invader. It may be the last creature of an ancient world, a species that existed before maps were drawn, before flags were planted on ships, before humans called the sea a trade route. Perhaps humans are the ones entering its territory, bringing hooks, iron nets, cannons, greed, and the belief that everything they discover can be claimed. This makes the image of the Kraken far deeper. It is not simply a monster that must be destroyed. It is a question about the boundary between exploration and violation, between survival and exploitation, between wanting to understand the world and wanting to force the world to serve us. In many stories of dark mythology and epic fantasy, monsters often become mirrors reflecting the corruption of humanity. The Kraken is the same. The larger it becomes, the smaller humans appear. But precisely because humans feel small, they become even more desperate to prove they are great. And from that, tragedy begins. The tragedy is not that humans go to sea, but that they forget the ocean never promised to kneel before them. A captain who hears of the Kraken can choose to turn back. But glory whispers, gold whispers, fame whispers. The blank spaces on the map call out to those who do not know fear. And so the ship enters forbidden waters, not because they do not know the danger, but because humans often believe danger is something that happens to someone else. The Kraken waits there, without roaring, without warning, without appearing like a theatrical, dark god. It is simply the truth that humans have ignored for too long. And when that truth rises, every boast spoken on deck becomes small before the cracking of wood and the rush of seawater. The sight of the Kraken attacking a ship, therefore, carries the power of an almost ritual destruction. First comes the unnatural silence. Then the surface of the water begins to deform, widening rings spreading like the sign of a gate opening beneath the sea. Then the tentacles rise like pillars of a black temple, wrapping around the hull, tilting the mast, snapping the beams once considered the pride of human craftsmanship. The sound of cracking wood echoes like the spine of the ship breaking in two. A sailor falling into the water is not merely falling into death, but out of a world of order. On deck, humans still have rank, law, and command. Beneath the water, all of that disappears. There is only instinct, darkness, and a force pulling downward that cannot be resisted. That is why the image of being dragged into the abyss is so haunting. It is not a quick death, not a sword stroke or a gunshot. It is disappearance. No grave, no explanation, no body to return home, no final moment for loved ones to hold on to. For ancient coastal communities, this was a terrible grief. A person who died on land could still be buried, mourned, and remembered by name, but someone swallowed by the sea became an absence. And the Kraken is the shape of that absence. It represents those who never returned, ships that never reached harbor, stories cut short halfway through, and questions the sea never answers. If we look even deeper, the Kraken also touches a very modern psychological fear. The fear of what is buried in the unconscious. In mythology, the ocean often symbolizes the hidden depths of the mind, the place where memories, desires, guilt, obsession, and the things we refuse to face are kept. The Kraken lying beneath the sea resembles the darkness pushed down into the depths of the soul. Most of the time it remains silent, but when we go too far, when we become too arrogant, when we think we have control over everything, it rises. And at that moment, what destroys the ship is not only the monster outside, but the things inside ourselves that we once refused to confront. That is why the Kraken does not belong only to sailors. It belongs to every human being who has ever had a deep sea within them. A secret they dare not open, an ambition they dare not name, a fear hidden beneath a calm exterior, a memory they thought had sunk, but was still alive. The Kraken's tentacles, symbolically, are like the buried parts of the mind suddenly rising, wrapping around the present, and pulling people back toward what they once ran from. It reminds us that no darkness disappears simply because we refuse to look down. And no ship is truly safe if beneath it lies an abyss that has never been acknowledged. In fantasy worlds, the Kraken is often placed alongside ancient entities, beings almost divine, existing beyond human history. This is important, because the Kraken does not have an age in the way humans understand it. It is not a character born, grown, and dead within a clear lifetime. It feels like a surviving piece of prehistory, proof that the world is older, deeper, and stranger than any civilization has ever imagined. Castles can collapse, kingdoms can change names, empires can vanish. But beneath the deep sea, the Kraken still moves in darkness. It is the memory of a world that does not need human history in order to exist. That ancient feeling is what gives the Kraken its epic power. It is not simply a battle between hero and monster. It is a confrontation between human time and the time of the abyss. On one side is the ship, a symbol of the desire to move forward, build, explore, name, and control. On the other side is the Kraken, a symbol of what existed before every map and may still remain after every map has rotted away. When these two forces collide, the question is not only who wins, the question is what meaning human ambition has before powers that have existed for thousands of years, silent and cold beneath the surface of the world. And perhaps the answer is not entirely pessimistic, because even though humans fear the Kraken, they continue to tell stories about it. They still draw it on maps, bring it into poetry, films, games, novels, and new legends. This reveals something very special about human nature. We fear darkness, but we are also fascinated by it. We tremble before the abyss, but still want to look down. We know we might be swallowed, but we still go to sea. Perhaps that contradiction is what creates every great adventure. Without fear, courage would have no shape. Without the Kraken, the sea would be only water, not a gateway into the unknown. The Kraken, then, is not merely the monster that sailors feared more than death itself. It is the reason death at sea takes on a mythic color. It turns accidents into legends, loss into story, terror into symbol. It makes humans understand that there are places in the world that cannot be reduced to data, maps, or strategy. There are dark regions that must be respected, not because we are weak, but because we are wise enough to know we are not the center of the universe. The Kraken does not demand that humans stop exploring. It only demands that humans remember, exploration without humility can easily become suicide. Today we have satellites, submarines, sonar, deep-sea robots, and technologies once thought to be magic. We have seen strange creatures living under crushing pressure, giant squids that once existed only in rumor, and abyssal trenches where sunlight has never reached. But the more we know, the more we realize that the ocean still holds countless unknowns. The Kraken may not exist exactly as legend describes it, but the feeling that created it remains intact. Every time a human being looks into the night sea and sees an endless blackness, the Kraken lives again. Not necessarily in flesh, but in the cold question of what might still be waiting below. Perhaps that is the greatest power of legend. It does not need to be scientifically true in order to reveal a truth. The Kraken tells us that beneath every peaceful surface, there may be forces far greater than we imagine. It tells us that human power, however mighty, can be broken in a single moment. It tells us that greed often brings us close to things we are not strong enough to understand. And it also tells us that fear, if listened to, is not always an enemy. Sometimes, it is the final instinct that helps us survive before the abyss. The question is not whether humans feel fear. The question is what we choose after fear. Humility, or the arrogance to continue forward as if the world has no limits. When a ship sinks in the legend of the Kraken, the most terrifying thing is not the sound of breaking wood, not the enormous tentacles, and not the vortex dragging everything into the deep. The most terrifying thing is the moment just before it happens, when everyone realizes they have gone too far, that every warning was true, that the sea is never conquered, it only temporarily allows us to pass. And if we mistake that permission for ownership, the abyss will answer. That answer needs no words. It needs only a dark shape rising from beneath the water, and a ship vanishing from the world. And so, the story of the Kraken does not end with a battle. It ends in the silence of the sea after the chaos. The ship is gone. Broken planks drift across the surface. The foam fades. The sky remains gray. And the ocean becomes calm again, as if nothing ever happened. For humans, it is tragedy. For the sea, it is only a small movement on the surface. That indifference is what makes the Kraken more terrifying than even a wrathful, dark god. Because an enemy at least sees us and acknowledges that we exist. But the ocean does not. It can swallow everything, then return to silence. Deep, vast, and beautiful in a way that chills the soul. The Kraken is still down there, in legend, in memory, in the black dreams of sailors, and in the deepest part of our own minds. It reminds us that fantasy worlds are fascinating not only because they contain monsters, but because through monsters, we see ourselves more clearly. We see the greed of those who want to cross every limit. We see the fear of those who know they are small. We see the desire to explore, but also the price of forgetting humility. And we see that sometimes the most terrifying monster is not the thing lying at the bottom of the sea, but the arrogant belief that nothing is large enough to pull us down. Thank you all for following today's story. If you love dark legends, ancient creatures, and fantasy worlds where fear always hides behind majestic beauty, stay with the channel for the next videos. I'll see you again on the next journey, where we will continue stepping into mysterious lands, forgotten myths, and the shadows that humanity both fears and cannot stop looking into.